Hi there, and welcome. Steve Wills here. Thanks for joining me. In this video, this is the first of our series in advanced process automation. We'll be looking at the various building blocks that go into Workflow Ascendant, starting at the very lowest level and working our way to the top. Each one of these being dedicated to a particular audience. So here, just very briefly, script libraries containing frequently used subroutines that are available for your use in developing your applications. List classes. These are used absolutely throughout in Workflow Ascendant. And basically what we're trying to do here is to push complexity into these bricks to make code both easier to read and write, therefore to maintain. And you might think of these as being to load a script as C++ is to C. So basically putting us at a different level. To show you an example of this, this is a new functionality that we put in place recently where the database administrator can essentially take on any role in the process. So here we are in the debugger, of course. Now here we're basically going from the definitions, so the abstract, down to the concrete, specific usernames, for example. We have several different entry points, depending on the context. And here is the routine that was added. As you can see, if the username belongs to that particular role, and here going into the list, orange is the anticipated user to intervene. As you can see, we're changing those over. Basically just to remind people just how powerful and wonderful this debugger is. Certainly one of the pillars of Domino throughout the years. Code abstraction. This is basically the integration point between IT professionals and Power Business users. The relevant hooks are on document open as well as on document send. And so in the latter, this is linked to the particular path that's selected in the process. For the former, since no path has yet been selected, it's the user going into a particular document, it's based on the constraint. So taking a look at example, we'll be assigning users and both controlling data selectively based on state changes. And what this is context-based operations using code abstraction. So taking a look to see what it looks like, we've seen this basically in the previous video, but just going through it a bit more quickly. Here's where usernames are being assigned to the various roles in the process. So now we'll advance in the process. The simple process is described in the diagram on your right. Now going into marketing, we'll copy and paste this document just to show the two paths that can be taken in the workflow. You can see the control is applied when marketing attempts to approve the document. So we'll fill in those fields and now approve it. As you can see, it goes off. And when the document is sent back to the user for modification, no controls are applied. So how is this done? So going into the state documents, we'll start with the initial document. $created is always the first state document in the process. Here is where those routines are executed. Now going into the state associated with marketing. There the control is set, but only on the approved path. And lastly, in the field documents, a routine will actually access these to bring those users into the workflow document. Application specific. So you can see here the routines that were called. And here the connection between the text in the state documents and the actual routine calls. Code abstraction. State documents. We've looked at these throughout the various videos. They dictate application behavior. It's the absolute heart of Workflow Ascendant. Important to remember these are directly interpreted documents, which means there are no layers between you and what's actually executed, which is extremely valuable. So just reviewing some of the details, this is where we left off in the last example, the connection between IT professionals and Power Business users. Now reviewing some of the details, the constraints, who can intervene, the associating routing rules associated with those constraints, those users. These are directly interpreted at if-then statements. Here is where the log is updated depending on the path that's selected. Parallel operations, inclusive operations, so on and so forth. All have been treated extensively in previous videos. You're welcome to go back and check those out. Child documents, now looking at notifications. Again, everything that's happening is right in front of your eyes. Document author, the next users to intervene in the process, interpreted at formula statements. Basically, for 90% of these notifications, it's copying and pasting existing examples, 90% of the time. Actions, so updating the document, those fields with these interpreted at formula statements. Trigger documents. These affect workflow documents based on time. So we'll throw up a few examples here on the right of what they can do. And you might think of trigger documents are to elapsed time as state documents are to specific user actions. So taking a look now at a trigger document. This is the segment in the process, which is handled by this particular trigger document, the start and end points. This is the time period, which triggers the event. So an event, routines that are executed, several things can occur. Here, if a state is included here, a state name, the document will be routed to that state automatically. Looking at the notifications, again, very similar to what we saw in the state documents. Here's the email to be sent. And actions to be taken. So this, when it's activated, you can see that's what actually puts up that icon in the view. And when the workflow document moves out of this period, these are the fields to be set. And in this particular example, erases that alert icon. Process snippets. This is the highest level that we'll be looking at. That was a pretty good idea. So for us, process snippets are a set of state documents, and they are basically reusable process segments that we can copy and paste into applications. So very simply, we're just copying and pasting documents. Just a reminder that everything is a document in Workflow Ascendant and can be manipulated just like any other document. Copying and pasting, reusing. Here we're basically copying and pasting state documents. We will replace the process name. As you can see here, we select it from our list. You can use this functionality to change any field. And there's the new process. Upping the complexity a bit, this is essentially a generic approval circuit. We refer this as a user stack, where we push usernames onto the stack and we pop them off as you go through the process. I've seen this particularly used in the context of purchasing applications. So I've got a diagram up in the right-hand corner to help follow along with what's happening. So as we move through the process, usernames are being popped off the stack, going through that approval process. And lastly, once the user stack is empty, the document is routed to director for approval. So going into the state documents, we'll go into the initial state here. This is where the stack is set. Again, you might set this stack based on any number of criteria. Here we have a virtual state, perhaps better referred to as a pass-through state, where the document is routed immediately, and that depending on whether or not the stack is empty, the user stack. So here is where the stack is maintained. Most of these updated fields have to do with the comments field, essentially allocating a specific comment field for each manager, if you will. And lastly here, always remember that no one is expected to dive into this code. It's basically copying and pasting from one application to another as it doesn't change. Just going back to this slide, every once in a while, an idea comes along that is so simple and so transformative that once it's out there, it's impossible to think of it in any other terms. Perhaps the same will also be true of process automation. Thanks for joining me.